Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to another Climbing the Rating Ladder video. I'm playing Eduardo Charmant, rated 2310. Good player here from Brazil. Opens with d4, d5. Let's play flexibly. Let's go knight f3. Black plays knight f6. Yeah, so I usually go for Queen's Gambit, but for whatever reason today, I'm not feeling a Queen's Gambit. Let's play a Torre attack. Bishop g5. No London system. We're not putting the bishop on f4, at least yet. We're going Torre attack, just to get out of opening preparation a little bit. Okay, and e6 makes a lot of sense. Let's play knight bd2. And I'm partly playing this opening because I want to continue focusing on my time management. This is a 10+0 game, so no increment. The Lone Wolf series really caused me to re-examine my own time management, even though I know it has been an ongoing issue for me. Let's play c3. But it's really maybe look at it again in a new light. Okay, so I could take on f6 and play e4, kind of like a French defense, but that doesn't quite seem in the spirit of the position, so let's play e3. And I say it's not in the spirit of the position because black is not committing to h6 yet, so I don't think it's quite so wise. Now here, though, bishop takes f6 could make sense, because on bishop takes, I could take on c5. It's going to be hard to keep that pawn, though. Queen c7, if I play b4. Yeah, let's just play bishop d2, or bishop d3. I think it would have been hard to hold on to that pawn. So just bringing the pieces into the game. Really typical stuff here. Again, looking at bishop takes f6, black's really tempting me to do that. Because now it's a little different with black having committed to knight c6. I could play knight b3. Black might have to maneuver their knight in order to try to hold the pawn. It looks interesting. It definitely looks potentially playable. Let's try it. Let's take. If it looks interesting and I don't see any flashing red signals at this time control, I just got to go for it and trust my instinct. Maybe black will take with the g-pawn because they're scared of that. I would suspect black takes with the bishop, though. I think they're going to dare me to take, which I definitely will, because if I don't take, there's no reason to capture on f6 and give up a bishop for a knight. Generally, you want to favor your bishops ever so slightly compared to a knight. That comes with all sorts of caveats. Like, the lower rated you are, the less having the bishop pair matters. The less relevant the bishop pair is in general. Also, I think the faster the time control, the less the bishop pair matters. But at this level, I'm not playing bishop takes f6 just to trade a bishop for a knight. And that's the end of the story. I'm doing it for a specific reason, and that's why black is thinking here. But like I said, I do believe black's going to take with the bishop, because g takes, it's probably playable. It just doesn't look, doesn't look too healthy for black. Yep, so threatening a fork. This move crossed my mind. I thought either move the bishop or maybe play e4. I think e4 makes a decent amount of sense as well. You know, I actually think I'm going to play e4, but I think e5 wasn't great for black because now the bishop doesn't have scope towards the c3 pawn. So b4 is back on the agenda for me. If I ever want to support the c5 pawn, I'm not going to run into bishop takes c3. But for now, let's play e4. This is sort of like a Slav or a semi-Slav in reverse, in a way. Bishop g4. All right, so I could take, but I don't see a huge reason to rush that. There's no tactic towards h7 or something. Queen c2 maybe could make sense. That doesn't look too bad. Just step out of the pin. Maybe even queen b3. I'm going to go queen c2, though. Step out of the pin. Menace the capture on d5 when I have bishop takes h7 in mind after that. Could have also taken and then played queen c2, although I don't think I should invite the queen up to attack the pawn on c5 without good reason to do so. So this seems fine. I'll probably castle short. pretty soon. Maybe throw an h3 somewhere, maybe b4. But still in consolidation mode here. Okay, g6. Yeah, and I think castles looks good, and then I can work up to b4 if needed. Yeah, black's kind of tethered to the d5 pawn for now with their queen. So something like queen e7 could just be answered by e takes d5, hitting the knight. So black's going to want to probably resolve this issue pretty soon. Yeah, they bring the bishop back to further defend. b4, capturing on d5, kind of like b4. b4, d4, a3 maybe? Or b4, d4, b5 even? Looks good. Yeah, let's play b4. Even on the clock. And I'm up a pawn. Hope you're all doing well, by the way. It's been a hot minute, but still trying to crank out the content when I can. Yeah, d4 played. So here, I can either charge forward with b5, or I can play a stabilizing move, a3. I think they're both pretty good. b5 is probably the more principled move. And then if black takes on c3, I could maybe take on c6. Black takes on d2, I take b7. Yeah, this move feels right. Feels pretty good. Let's play it. Kick this knight around. So even though this is climbing the rating ladder, I am not treating this opponent as an inferior player whatsoever. You know, I always try to play objectively no matter who I'm playing, but there are certain things that you will do differently if you're playing a much higher rated player, a much lower rated player, or anywhere in between. But a player like this, I'm pretty much treating as if I'm playing a fellow international master or something. I might try to use my experience edge, my presumed experience edge at times, but in terms of pure psychology, the moments that might be relevant are going to be pretty nuanced if they exist at all. Like I'm expecting, in other words, to have to outplay this player purely on the board, and players at this rating level just don't have a ton of bad habits. But we'll see if I can point anything out, or maybe be self-critical about something too. You never know. So I think black should move the knight. I don't think taking on c3 is wise because I can take c6 and then b7. So I would expect knight a5, after which I will take on d4. And then I was thinking maybe queen a4 in some case to just tether black's queen to the knight on a5. If ever black plays b6, maybe I can play c6. Perhaps I have to be concerned about a6 in some cases, but absolutely I think I'll take on d4 to start. Maybe I can follow up with e5 and even plant my knight on d6. We'll see. Yeah, black does play that. Let's take on d4 as planned. And now e5 or rook fc1 I think makes sense too. Queen a4, like I said. These are all plausible. But e5, knight e4, on the surface at least, seems pretty nice. The only thing is bishop e7, rook c8 might be annoying. So maybe rook f to c8 to start. Or rook f to c1 to start. Let's do that. Bring this rook over. And I'm using this rook because I think the a rook could be handy in guarding the pawn on a2 in some cases. And I don't foresee the center opening up either. So just trying to play a little flexibly there. Okay, rook c8. Yep, makes sense. And now here I might move that queen. Queen a4. Just want to have something in mind against bishop e7. Bishop e7. I guess I could play c6 then. Pawn c6. That's a pretty powerful pawn. Let's go for it. Queen a4. Try to keep my time edge. I've now got a over 45-second edge. That'll be relevant, trust me, if I can keep it. So bishop e7, c6, I'm thinking. I'm not going to take on d4 because even though I would remain up a pawn, I somehow think black gets some decent compensation out of that. So c6, and if we get some trade like this, I can take with the rook. Bishop d7, I can take on c8. Black takes on a4, and I think I've won a piece out of that. Yeah, so let's go c6. Pre-move the capture. Good to pre-move in these scenarios if you know 100% you're going to play that move. I doubt black considers much else. I mean, maybe queen b6 or something. But I think stands to reason black's going to want to take. And I love that the center is closed. I like that I don't have to worry about too much counterplay in the middle. I've contained these bishops pretty nicely. They are observing my queen side by side, but I think I have a nice handle on them for now. Is c7 a threat? Not quite, because black has rook takes c1 at the end. But that's an idea we can keep in mind. I think knight takes d4 is probably a threat now. Supported by my queen. Yeah, knight takes d4, bishop f6. I can bring the other knight up. Maybe there's some complications with bishop g4. But I'm glad black's the one who's having to think about all this. And black's still under pressure being down a pawn. Bishop a6 is in the air too. Okay, queen c7. So just daring me to take on d4. Black's probably hoping that they can open lines and get some sort of compensation. So just letting that pawn go. Which may not be a bad idea, honestly. Let's see. Knight takes d4, rook f d8. I take on e6, and then I guess black is claiming I have some issues with my coordination there. Yeah, I mean, that's maybe fair. I have other moves too, though. Perhaps knight b3 could make sense. Just try to gouge that knight out of there, because if takes, yeah, black's walking right into a pin. Kind of like knight b3. Looks useful. I'm going to go for it. Again, in a bid to keep my time edge. These knights were a bit redundant anyways. They were somewhat stepping on each other's toes. Let's pre-move the capture, because I'm going to take with the a-pawn, regardless of how black takes, if they do. I think they kind of have to, because the knight on a5 is otherwise in trouble. I like how this game is flowing. Just, I made a pretty critical decision early. Bishop takes f6 with the idea of d takes c5. And I let black have to work everything out after that. And black's been struggling to do so. Black does take. They take with a bishop. So here I was thinking it's kind of nice that b4 is in the air. And most importantly, I'm hitting the knight. Ooh, this could be actually fatal right away. Knight takes c6, bishop b5. And down goes that knight. Yeah, so bishop b5 looks good. Not the only move. I mean, there's knight takes d4 as well. There's even bishop a6. So there are several ways I could potentially convert here. I like bishop b5. It looks pretty simple. I mean, I don't pick up the d-pawn, but that's about as clean as you can get for winning a piece. Yeah, I don't even think that d-pawn's that valuable for black. So let's go bishop b5. Just to avoid anything with bishop f6 or rook d8, targeting those pieces down the d-file when I'm maybe not quite prepared for it. Because I think if I win the knight cleanly, I can definitely neutralize the enemy d-pawn. So queen b7, again, I look at bishop a6, but black just resigns. Yeah, it didn't even wait for me to take something. Okay, hey, a bit anticlimactic at the end there, but I think a good example of time management. I'm I'm proud of myself for how I handled my clock there. And I'm trying to get in the habit of the Hikaru style commentary, even though I'll never come close to Hikaru in playing ability. But I want to model my commentary more after him, where he's very good about keeping up the pace of his moves and then explaining them after the fact, right? He doesn't let his explanations get in the way of his move execution. And I need to work on that as a streamer and content creator. So good. Okay, yeah, I think Black probably has some compensation after D takes C5 if they play this properly. But I actually believe E5 was a pretty significant mistake, because after E4, this tension did Black no favors. And the fact that Black closed down this diagonal towards the pawn on C3, it uncomplicates my task in holding this pawn on C5, because B4 is just always on the table without losing the C3 pawn. So that, I think, is the key thing that Black underestimated or just didn't consider when playing E5. And again, this looks a lot like, if we reverse the board here, if we flip things, this looks a lot like some lines of the semi-Slav or the Slav, where one side will grab the C pawn and then look to hold on to it. And in some cases, it's incorrect to do that, or you can't hold on to the pawn in the long term. But here, it just seemed somewhat difficult for Black once they played knight c6 and we got this trade to actually get the pawn back cleanly. But probably Black should play queen e7, at least force me to play knight b3, because again, b4 runs into bishop takes c3. And if Black had played a5, I could play a4. I think this is for sure an improved version for Black compared to the game. I mean, even e5, e4 is probably an improved version, something like this. Black's just better coordinated, and I have to watch the knight on b3. Maybe Black could even play knight b8 and try to come to d7 at some point. That crossed my mind. I thought about, I don't think I articulated it, but I thought about something like bishop b5 to actually trade for the knight if this happens, or maybe play c6. But I'm pretty sure Black has some counterplay here, some compensation for the pawn. Okay, so let's take a look at the analysis. 96% for me compared to 85. I'm just going to click right to the game review. I usually like to look at this view. Yeah, and who knows, maybe one of my tools in my arsenal in a bid to always keep pace on the clock or stay ahead, my never-ending attempt to use the clock as a weapon, is to play openings that are a little more offbeat and not necessarily a pure try for an advantage. Because, again, I usually play Queen's Gambit. It's the principled thing to do against d4, d5. But I don't know, today, for whatever reason, I just felt like playing a Torre attack. So bishop g5, just creating a little tension. If I can take and double Black's pawns, that's potentially nice. But by no means does Black have to allow that. I mean, even if Black plays the move that's indicated here, knight e4, let's say I go bishop h4, the fact that I'm pinning the e-pawn gives the game some independent flavor. So I won't go into anything deep here because there's honestly not much I know in the way of deep theory after bishop g5 in this position, but just creating a little tension, making a fluid developing move. Sometimes there are London system parallels compared to if, White plays bishop f4 right away. Because I also play this Torre attack line. Let's say if Black goes knight f6. Sometimes I'll play it against the King's Indian, like this. And it's sort of nice to induce the kingside pawns forward in some cases. It's also nice in some cases to capture the knight on f6. Sometimes White can get an e4 if Black refrains from playing d5. But these are all mostly ideas rather than strict theory we're adhering to. Okay, so as played, e6, and I went knight bd2. Yeah, and I mean, this is a classic case where this early, and I played knight bd2 in what, 6 seconds? Absolutely, I shouldn't be spending time on trying to discern between e3, c3, or knight bd2. And I'm glad I didn't do that, because if I hem and haw for 20, 30 seconds about which one of these moves to play, it's not going to affect the evaluation hardly at all. And it's just poor time management. So yeah, just bringing the pieces into the game. Okay, bishop d3, all standard. Yeah, because if I take on f6 and then take here, the fact that black has bishop e7, and yeah, this is especially why. Black hasn't committed the knight yet, so knight d7 is more direct in trying to win the pawn back. And again, b4 runs into bishop takes c3. So if I want to try to hold the pawn, knight b3, but that's not going to last too long. Queen c7, and then knight takes c5 is back on the agenda. Okay, so bishop d3, knight c6, and yeah, the computer isn't enamored by bishop takes f6. It actually gives it an inaccuracy. But look at that. I mean, it doesn't drop the evaluation much. We go from, you know, a fairly negligible advantage this early and in this non-theoretical of a position, non-critical position, to one that the computer thinks is equal or maybe a tiny bit better for white. And actually the move it wants black to play is g takes f6. Okay. Yeah, and what would I have done against g takes f6? It's an interesting question. Black's king is weak, but this is not the type of scenario where I can expect to immediately attack black's king. You know, I can't just play knight h4 in the hopes that I'm going to play queen h5 and then give mate on h7. That's too easy for black to defend against. They can go f5, bishop takes h4 as a threat. Black's not going to lose the game based on their king being semi-exposed down the g file. There's still not that many open lines to work with. I just gave up one of my pieces. I exchanged one of my pieces in the vicinity of the black king. It's not going to be that easy. But yeah, maybe take and then e4, something along those lines. Well, I guess the engine doesn't like that. Bishop c2. I don't know, maybe trying for knight b3 and queen d3 somehow. I'm not sure. I mean, I could see myself castling short and just playing this strategically. Maybe I would have played it flexibly, though, queen e2 and try to castle long. But yeah, black can try to mobilize these pawns and try to open up the center somehow for their bishops. So yeah, g takes f6. I understand black's dilemma. I also thought they would take with the bishop rather than the pawn. But I think the key thing, and you know, again, I'm harping on time management here, I think you got to make one of those decisions pretty quickly. Because within probably a couple seconds, black realized why I was voluntarily trading the bishop for the knight, if they hadn't realized it earlier. I'm trying to play off of their bishop on e7 being overloaded. So I think black fairly quickly, and I'm saying this because I know I would also use some time here, but I think black should fairly quickly determine whether it's worth it for them to slightly open up their king, but protect the pawn, or just gambit the pawn. I think if you're going to gambit the pawn, you should do so pretty confidently and quickly. So, because you have this compounding effect, right? Like after bishop takes f6, you're going down a pawn, but probably more importantly, you just spent over a minute on that move. You just spent over 10% of your remaining time on this one decision in a non-increment game. So yeah, so how does the computer want black to play this? Queen e7, hitting the pawn, knight b3, yeah, and this is the line I mentioned, e5, or one of them. e4, d4, something like this. I mean, this on site doesn't look bad for white, but it's a little less fluid when my knight is protecting the pawn. I'd much rather have a pawn anchored on b4, protecting that pawn on c5. So if I could have played a3 and b4, that would be much more desirable than what we have here. This might be a little awkward. I might have to play rook c1 in the future. Maybe black goes bishop g4, and I got to watch knight e5. Black can easily bring their rooks to the center. Yeah, this looks like a much, much better version. And I bet e5 is going to get a question mark. Okay, got a dubious mark. Yeah, e5. So it makes some sense trying to counterattack in the center when I've just made a play for a flank pawn. But this e4 move just comes at perfect timing for whites. Because black doesn't really want to initiate the trade where I can jump up and defend the pawn, attack the bishop. Maybe this is still okay, especially if they can get an f5. But I can frustrate that plan. Bishop takes e4 is probably good. So yeah, the tension no longer really favors black. in pursuing this e5 operation and inviting e4. So bishop g4. Now, this felt to me like there were probably several good moves. Looks like queen a4 is a consideration, h3, e takes d5 even. Queen a4 is kind of clever because it introduces e takes d5 when the queen has access laterally. I didn't consider that, but I think queen c2 is okay. Still keeps a nice edge. Yeah, and g6, so black tries to keep the tension further. The computer votes for d4. But again, this is just an improved version over some of these other lines. Let's just say I castle, for instance. D takes c3, queen takes c3. Yeah, I mean, this more or less looks like a pawn to me. I can still pursue a3, b4. Yeah, there's the d4 square I got to watch. Maybe some stuff down the d file, but I'm less optimistic just eyeballing this as a human about black's compensation than the engine appears to be. And I've noticed this chess.com engine, maybe it's something to do with my depth or how it's running. It seems to me it compresses the evaluations. So in other words, it doesn't say one side has as large or one side is at as great of a disadvantage as it might seem. Because I've noticed in positions when even one side is totally lost, the engine will only indicate like -2 or something, -2.5, which sort of indicates that maybe there's a chance to defend. Whereas I think if I were running Stockfish on my PC at the highest level with the greatest number of cores, it would have said like -5, -6. So just anecdotal, but I wonder if you guys have had the same experience. Okay, anyways, so g6 was played instead of d4. Yeah, castles seem fine. Again, I'm not in a hurry to take and invite this queen out. And black's playing g6 because they want to block my queen bishop battery, since I might be now looking to play e takes d5. So g6, castles, bishop e6. Yep, b4. So black retreats the bishop, presumably to try to free up their queen. But that didn't disrupt my attempt to play b4. Still wants black to think about d4 or maybe a5. Yeah, and I should mention a5 because in the pure Slav defense, which if you'll allow me a digression, so this opening here, this is the main position of the Slav. Black can play e6 and go into the so-called semi-Slav, or another major option, they can take on c4, which is the pure Slav. This bears a resemblance in reverse to what we had in the game. And now it's known that white's best move is a4 here, or at least this is the best try for an advantage, because this preempts black playing b5 to support the pawn. So it actually makes sense for white to play this in advance of black even thinking about playing b5, versus if you push the e-pawn right away to try to recover the pawn, b5 is a pretty good option. White can still play a4 after the fact here, but this is less promising than a4 directly, according to theory. So there are some parallels, and maybe I should have even mentioned that like here, this a5 move. I think in all these cases, though, when the knight has been committed to c6 in the game, I can play this, and the fact that I have this knight on d2 ready to come to b3 to support the pawn on c5 is relevant compared to the Slav, where there's no knight on d7 that's readily able to support this pawn on c4. And if black were to attempt something like that, let's say like this, white could actually use this a-pawn to push the knight away. And if black takes time out to play a5, well, the timing doesn't work out, because this is under pressure. Any attempt like bishop e6 is probably going to fail to hold the pawn too. So nice little comparison there. That's a good example of how opening knowledge builds on itself. So even this was not a Slav or a semi-Slav, with reverse colors, I'm able to employ some of these ideas that I'm familiar with, like taking the pawn on c5 and the various ways I can support this pawn, especially with the queenside pawns. Yeah, so bishop e6, it seems slow. I guess d4 or a5 are better, but you know, I understand black's dilemma at this point. It's not simple to get compensation. Yeah, if bishop takes f3, I was going to take back with the knight. If pawn takes e4, I can take with the bishop. There's no issues here. I mean, maybe black should do something like bishop g7 and try to get an f5 in the long term, but trying to get some pawn roller in the center. But yeah, there's ways I can diffuse this. I can go for this because if f5, there's bishop c4, winning on the spot, winning the queen. So I wouldn't allow black to easily achieve f5. A timely capture on d5 would open the center and allow me counterplay. So bishop e6, b4, d4. Yeah, and I'm going to give myself another pat on the back. I just got to keep reminding myself to be proud of these moments where I made good time management decisions, because I mentioned a couple candidate moves, a3 and b5. Looks like a3 is good, but b5 is better. The most important thing is I didn't spend too long on those moves. Like, still 30 seconds on this move, but it wasn't anything too crazy. And I was mostly focused on how to maintain and even increase my advantage from here. And I chose a fairly direct continuation, so hitting the knight. Yeah, because if black takes on c3, I think b takes c6, c takes d2, and then take on b7 with c6 coming. Yeah, this is overwhelming. And even the chess.com engine agrees. +4. These pawns are worth their weight in gold. I'm threatening c7. The pawn on d2 is going to fall soon. Probably just losing. Definitely losing. So black played knight a5. Yeah, knight e7 is an alternative, but looks kind of cramping. So knight a5, I take on d4. And I play rook fc1. That's okay. Again, close call. Rook fc1, rook ac1. 30 seconds spent on this move. Maybe I could have made this a little faster, but e5 was also tempting. I just didn't want to at all overextend. So do something like this, which might give black's bishops a chance to enter the game, and maybe I have to deal with some pressure on c5. Felt like keeping this pawn on e4 was good because it kept black's light square bishop at bay, and it doesn't give black's bishop a reason to drop back with tempo to e7. But yeah, real close call between putting either of these rooks on c1. I mean, you can see from the eval, rook ac1 is the preference, but a tenth of a pawn maybe is the difference. Quarter of a pawn maximum, but still plenty good for white. So hard to say. But one way you can determine which rook you might want to use is if you look at the other rook that isn't moving to the square in question, ask yourself what use is it on the square that it's remaining on. So, and I had kind of a reason for this. I like the rook was defending the a pawn in some cases. May not be too relevant because so is my queen, and it felt like the theater of action was on the queen side anyways. So very, very close call. Okay, rook c8. Now I went queen a4. Looks okay. e5 is also a consideration, but I like stepping out of this pin. Bishop e7. Yeah, a6 is another move the engine suggests. But yeah, a6 invites captures at the very least. So bishop e7 and c6 is good. Okay, so pushing the pawn. Black takes. And then queen c7. And I like knight b3. This felt like it worked out pretty well, getting the knight in the game, mainly to dislodge this knight on a5. And also it slightly unwinds my situation on the d file because, again, I mentioned knight takes d4. I think that move must be playable, must be good as well. But I just saw scenarios like this where the minor pieces stacked on the d file could be potentially annoying. And yeah, you can see only one move in this position. Bishop a6 keeps a very large advantage. So, could I assess that after rook takes d2, bishop takes c8, I'm still much, much better? I mean, probably. But why even allow this imbalance? Oh, I guess I win the knight. But in my mind, from several moves back, like, why even entertain something like this when it's becoming increasingly clear that I don't even have to take the pawn on d4. My pawn on c6 is plenty powerful. And actually, black collapsed pretty quickly after knight b3. So they took with the bishop Ah, bishop d8 is actually an option. That's not something I saw. Supporting the knight in this way. Yeah. And then taking here looks more reasonable, right? Black's rook can't get to f8, or d8 rather. I'm hitting the bishop. Yeah. So maybe knight takes b3 was best of all, but I just thought if I can get this pawn to b3, here's where my rook on a1 also turns out to be pretty handy because I'm threatening queen takes a7. Looks like there's maybe some token counterplay for black, but shouldn't work out. Yeah, this is pretty bad. Up 2 pawns. Still got to watch the bishops, but I think should be winning for white for sure. So yeah, in conclusion, I like this knight b3 move, even compared to knight takes d4, which also looks good. Just seemed cleaner. Dislodge the knight, focus on the area of the board, the queen side, where I've been making some nice strides, and just pound black on the clock. I was able to play this, okay, not super quickly. Again, I'm a little surprised that some of these moves did take me the length of time that I did, but the key thing is that I was staying pretty well ahead of black on the clock nonetheless. So even though I spent 45 seconds on this move, I still have almost a 2-minute advantage from here. So bishop takes, pawn takes, hitting the knight. Yeah, and this kind of spells the end because of the threat of queen takes a5. Black could play bishop d8, but then b4. This pawn is also mobile. Take, b5. Yeah, or bishop b5 again, either one. Black's losing. So black took directly. Not much else to do, I suppose. And then bishop b5, which actually gets the top move. Until I let this think for more, and then it might not say top move. But even here, I mean, knight takes d5, surely winning, but I'd have to contemplate some stuff where maybe, just maybe, there's some complications. Although, yeah, there's probably not even much here, because take would check, and then I can win the rook on c8 after that. But the game had been flowing so well, I wanted to keep up my intuitive and effective play. So maybe that'll be the title for this video. Yeah, and here black resigned, but just multiple good moves. I probably would have played bishop takes c6 for the record. Okay, thanks to my opponent for the game. So yeah, some themes here surrounding this sort of reverse Slav, reverse semi-Slav motif. Not necessarily opening, but motif, where I was grabbing this pawn on c5 and then making a bid to defend it. And interesting that e5, a fairly natural move, I think black put black into some serious troubles because the bishop on f6 was no longer staring at that pawn on c3. And yeah, didn't look like black ever had a chance for real compensation after this. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this game. Let me know if you play the Torre attack or Slav, semi-Slav, if any of these motifs resonate with you. We didn't get a chance to see some of the middle games that are possible out of this. Like, so if black had played b6 or something. But there's plenty of ideas here, too, for both sides. Sometimes black tries to trade light square bishops. I might attempt to stop that with queen e2. I probably castle short, but who knows? Maybe I would have castled long and done something crazy and modern with my kingside pawns. Maybe I try to jump up to e5 and support the knight, a la a London system. Maybe even try to maneuver the queen to h3. You never know. Many, many different ways this could play out. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks as always for watching. Thanks again to Eduardo Charmant, my opponent. And I'll see you guys again soon with another video. Bye, guys.